Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this gorgeous day. We should all be doing this outside, but democracy takes this kind of effort. My name is Melissa Kane. I'm a politics reporter with Channel 5. That's a CBS affiliate in San Francisco. And I'm so excited to have such a great turnout here today. Just quickly, by show of hands, how many of you have ever been to a town meeting before, like a town hall meeting before? Wow. Okay, so you know how this works. Basically, the way it's going to go, we're going to start, each of the members here is going to give a brief introduction, and then we're going to go to some questions that I'm going to ask them about some broader topics, and then at a little bit after 2, we're going to go to audience questions. We've got folks around with cards. They will both give you blank cards if you want them to write questions, and also they'll be collecting them. If you just hold them up, they'll come around to you, and they'll be bringing those up to me. On the subject of questions, just want to let you know, because we are using a state facility, we need to refrain from having questions about elections. So things like, who are you endorsing for this or that, we're not going to be able to ask. So just FYI, as you're filling out your questions, just make sure that you avoid issues like that. And I won't be asking those. And then at around 3 o'clock, we're going to have each of the members here give closing statements, and we will wrap things up, okay? So, but to kick us off, we have a very special treat for you guys. We have a performance artist named Leo, who's here. He's with the Urban Peace Movement and the Determination Black Men's Group. He's going to give a spoken word performance, and you guys might remember, among the many, many ballot measures on November's ballot, one was Prop 57, and that changes some of the parole considerations, allows for parole considerations for nonviolent felons, and also changes a bit the way we deal with juvenile prosecution. In any event, Leo's performance is dedicated to Prop 57. So everyone, please welcome Leo.
Leo. Hello, everybody. What's up? Before I start, I want to say that it is an extreme honor to be sitting at the table with these ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to just get started. This is dedicated to Prop 57 and my cousin, Dejan, baby Huey Ford. I think about it. I sleep about it. I dream about it. It's out of pocket that you knock people trying to get about it. Because if you not it, you ain't getting none of the profit. And I really want to make people think instead of make them sink. Let them gain some synopsis. Yo, if you young and you ain't got nothing else to do, drugs, money, the movement, it gotta be the truth. But me, I'm a brother, so I gotta stay in my youth, and the only way I can do that, I gotta stay in the booth. Let them know that it's better ways, better days. If you just kind of like switch it up and change your ways, there'll be less pain and suffering. You gotta lead, not follow. But if you following, make sure it's for a good cause, and you know just what the problem is. Then at that point, you can figure out how you can resolve it. Because nothing can just get accomplished if we just try to call it. We gotta look at our future and neuter the past around it, because we all make mistakes. You, me, we gotta sit down and just kind of think about it. I think I got the heart of God. Not really, I sin a lot. I'm caught up in my family ties. I'm looking in my daughter's eyes. I see the future right through her. I need to do well so my baby's success can occur. My baby, she done seen me at my worst. And all my secrets I tell nobody, because I tell her first. Like, I was born to be a thug, but it's more to life than thugging, That's becoming popular. And I don't like the attention for nothing. I'm just a young California person living. I love seeing all my people make it. I'm not worried about the time it's taking. God got me. I'm gonna stay patient. I get into a lot of trouble because I'm passionate. I be feeling like the only brother that's rationing. People thinking my head is full of cabbage because I do 50 over 40, taxing it. I'm trying to live in the hood, trying to be an activist. But I challenge anyone's positivity after this. You gotta be the change you see. Well, that ain't happened yet, because all I see is shadows versus the mannequins. But I'm in a room like this, changing society. We come in all variety, shapes and sizes, big. I'm moving with my heart, and I can't do that quietly. Because we ain't seeking nothing, so don't let them take all our privacy. We gotta learn to love each other, not to burn each other. It might sound cliche, but without that, we ain't moving no further. We gotta be the fighter and we gotta be the lover. Thank you, guys.
Well, I don't envy who has to follow that. Assemblyman Bonta, why don't you begin? Assemblyman Bonta is on the cusp of Libra and Virgo, although he considers himself a Virgo. I feel like you should know that. So he's going to begin with a short introduction.
Good afternoon. How are you guys today? I'm so excited to see you. Thank you all for being here. First, I want to start out with some thank yous, and let's give another round of applause and shout out to Leo. Thank you for getting us started in the right spirit. Want to thank Melissa for spending her time with us today and being the MC for the event. And just want to thank my colleagues for your partnership, for being the progressive champions that you are, and for being part of what I think is a great team, really pushing forward important progressive values here from the East Bay. So thank you for being here. Our partners that are surrounding the room, that have been on the ground fighting hard for criminal justice reform and health care for all and protecting our environment and so many things. Thank you all for being here and for your leadership. And thank you all for being here. This is a great turnout for our town hall here in the East Bay. I know there's a lot of things you can do on a beautiful Saturday here in the East Bay, and you've chosen to be here. So thank you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, go Dubs. Congratulations on an NBA championship. We're very proud of our team and the organization and our fans in Oakland and the East Bay. And again, I'm Rob Bonta. We're in my district. I'm excited to be and honored to be the assembly member representing the 18th Assembly District, Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. I'm in my third term, my fifth year. And this is really a time like no other, as you know. We're facing unprecedented challenges emanating out of Washington, D.C. Prior to the election on November 8th, the biggest question I was getting from constituents was, how can I afford to live in the East Bay, and how do I stay in my home and not get evicted? Now the biggest question I'm getting is, how can I be active? How can I do more? How can I push back against these values which are not ours coming out of Washington, D.C.? And your presence here is part of that movement and that sentiment that's so strong right now here in the East Bay. You know, we have folks who are scared, anxious, and nervous. We have folks who are fired up. We have folks who are everything in between. And we really need to harness that energy to stay active and move the values that we have here in the East Bay out to the rest of California and to the rest of the nation. There's a statement in politics that as California goes, so goes the nation. The statement I like to say is, as the East Bay goes, so goes California. And then so goes the nation. So, you know, this isn't the first time we've had a dark chapter in our history in California or in our country, but we've always done what we do. We're resilient. We fight. We make change. We're doers, and we're going to do that again. So we're going to have a great conversation today. I'm excited to be with you. Thank you all for being here.
Senator Nancy Skinner, a Leo.
It's cool to be lion-like. I also want to thank you very much for coming out today, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation on what California has been doing. I feel like we've been working on some very bold actions, taken some, and some are in progress, to both strengthen this Golden State, but also to respond to what we see coming at us from DC. I want to thank all of our staffs, Assemblymember Bonta, Assemblymember Thurmans, my staff have done incredible work to help to put this together, and really, really appreciate the work that they've put in, and of course, our community organizations that are here to provide us information on what they're doing, also very helpful and important. Melissa, thank you for agreeing to moderate. And Leo, there are many of us who have been dedicating our time to trying to put justice back into what has been wrongly called California's criminal justice system, because it has not been a just system. We have a long way to go. I will not in any way fool anyone. We have a long way to go. But we've done some very important things, and you, voters, have done some very important things. And Leo, thank you for reminding us. I know we'll talk about it more as we get into this conversation, but I just very pleased that we're being able to have the opportunity to talk to you today about some of what we are attempting and what California is undertaking. So thank you for being here.
Oh, okay, sorry, and Assemblyman Tony Thurmond, also a Leo. By the way, there's a theme here.
Leo, Leo, Leo. As Brother Leo was sharing his message with us, it was not lost on me that his T-shirt said that we should educate and not incarcerate. It is a theme that many of us have been using this year. The first bill that I introduced in the legislature this year was a tax on private prisons and those who profit off of our prisons, and to direct the money to after-school and preschool programs. I just want to lift that up, Leo, that we hear you. Yes, we have work to do, but we have to follow our activists, our artists, our young people, and we have to make it real. He kept it real in his message. We have to make it real. And because of what President Trump is trying to do to this country, we have to keep it real. My name is Tony Thurmond. I have the honor of representing the 15th Assembly District, parts of Oakland, great cities like Richmond and Berkeley. It's an honor to be here with you. I want to thank my colleagues for putting today's event together, our staffs, our MC, and each and every one of you for saying that we don't lay down when someone threatens us. We stand up and we show up. And you showed up today, and you're showing up in our country to make a difference. As I came here today, I thought about the title, about, California's values, and I personalized it. I always like to put things in a context, and in my mind, I thought about my grandparents and my mother who came here as immigrants to this country and to California, a beautiful, diverse state, and the contributions of immigrants and what that has meant to the success of our state and the diversity of our state, and that our president has led with an attack to break up our families and to undo all that we've done in California. In the last couple of years, we've put more money into creating a path to citizenship and funding naturalization and supporting our immigrant families to have health care and to have all the rights that we all deserve. And our president has repeatedly sent the message that that must be undercut. I come from local government where we have a tradition of sanctuary cities, and I'm proud of the 4 sanctuary cities in my district. And the misnomer that they tell us is that by asking for a sanctuary state or a sanctuary city is that we're going to create more crime. But if you look at the data, sanctuary cities actually have less crime. And so we have all the reason to continue leading in California and saying that we don't want our law enforcement agencies to get involved in ICE raids, and that we want to keep families together, and we don't want our families living in fear. It's a documented fact. It's a documented fact that we have seen more incidents of hate since President Trump has been elected. And I'm thankful that we're in a legislature that pushes back on that says we value diversity, but we've got more work to do because we see acts of hate popping up in our schools, in our communities, and our neighbors are threatened. And we've got so much work to do, and we've done a lot in the budget to provide legal resources for our families to be able to be protected. We're going to talk a lot about health care, and we're going to talk a lot about the president's false notions around climate change, and that he could have the audacity to want to move us out of the Paris Accords after we've worked so hard to be a leader on climate change and climate justice, environmental justice. And so, as the young folks say, we got to stay woke because we are under attack, and we've got to push back. We won't stand down. Together, we will stand up and stand up and stand out for the people of California. So thank you so much for being here today. We look forward to the conversation.
So I think one of the areas where there's just a very distinct difference between the Trump administration and in Democrats in California is, of course, the issue of immigration. So we'll start with Assemblyman Bonta, but I welcome either Senator Skinner or Assemblyman Thurmond to jump in on this. Can you talk about some of the things that California is doing or is proposed to do to try and protect undocumented people? I remember there was a bill that was talked about the other day that sort of limits the ability of contractors who participate in building a wall from basically making it so that those contractors would not be able to contract with the state ever again, essentially. So there's some things that are happening in the state legislature. Could you talk about where things stand?
Absolutely. In California and in the California state legislature, we know and believe that immigrants are a critical part of who we are and who we've become, and are a critical part of our future. And we will do everything in our power to stand up for, defend, protect, support our immigrant communities, period. We feel they are under direct, full frontal attack from Washington, D.C., and we're not going to let that happen. And so there's a couple of things that are happening that I think are really important. Some of them you may have focused on, some maybe not yet. But one of the things that's moving and is over in the Assembly now is SB 54, the Sanctuary State Bill. And I know there's some folks here that are huge supporters. I'm proud to be a co-author of that bill. The lead author is our pro tem Kevin DeLeon, and Assemblymember Thurmond, I think, just
Do you think that
made the case.
the governor will sign that?
I think he could, sure. And there's things that, I mean, this governor keeps his cards close to the vest, as we all know, and he doesn't focus on a lot of the big bills until they're over in the second house. This bill just got to the second house, and then he'll start getting involved to see if there's a way he can be supportive. I know from conversations directly with him that he has concerns about public safety. So those conversations will need to be had and see if the core values of the bill can be retained while addressing his concerns. So, but we also have things like SB 31, a ban on registries. We have SB 30, which, as you mentioned, doesn't allow, the state won't do business with any of the vendors who are working on any wall. Our view is no bans, no walls, no registries, no mass deportations. It's pretty clear. We're going to stand up and fight for our immigrants with everything that we have.
I'm sure you are aware that it's not just our fear of deportations, it is actually happening right now. We just had an incident where 2 workers who are affiliated with the Painters Union were picked up by ICE, and there's going to be a rally on Monday to try to basically get the San Francisco, the gentleman, which I don't have his name in front of me, but the gentleman who runs the ICE division for this region to basically have those folks released. So it's happening now. And interestingly, our Chief Justice of California's Supreme Court was very clear that, and she interestingly is also a Republican, that the executive order that the president did on immigration was so far-reaching that she feels it threatens the court's ability to serve justice, because she's fearful, and we've already seen some incidents of this, where people will not come forward and be witnesses, will testify. Also, that people will not report crimes for fear that someone in their family would be then at risk for being picked up by ICE. And we already know that ICE has a habit of, they hang out at courthouses and at law enforcement, they hang out at schools, they hang out in places like that, which there's some, we're still trying to collect the data, but there's some indication that a certain of our school districts have had a slight drop in attendance because families are fearful. So we need to be very, very bold about this. And the reality is, under that executive order, there's not even the ability to have due process. And so while California does not have the power to reverse that executive order or force that due process, what we just did in the budget is we increased the funding to legal aid. So now we because it was cut by the feds, but we've way expanded funding for legal aid. We've also directed our Attorney General to, in effect, make sure that our, this was more than just SB 54. So SB 54 basically says that our state, local, and other agencies of all sorts, law enforcement, every type, not just law enforcement, but even social service agencies, would not cooperate with or interact with federal enforcement of immigration laws unless under a judicial warrant. So that's what SB 54 says. But in the budget, we have now directed our Attorney General to basically ensure that our own officers of the Attorney General not interact, and that the Attorney General inspect the detainment facilities that are operating in California but house ICE detainees, because we've already witnessed where very bad conditions. I'm sure you followed the newspaper reports about the 14-year-old boy who is being held in the ICE detention facility in Yolo County. It's actually Yolo County's jail, but it's under contract to ICE. Or rather, ICE is contracting with Yolo County to operate this facility, and this boy had asylum, and yet he was kept for over a year. He was kept many times in solitary. He was doused with pepper spray. I mean, the conditions were really bad. So the budget we've adopted not only has money for legal aid, it has new powers for our Attorney General, and with the other actions that we're trying to take, we're doing everything that we can figure out in our powers to try to protect those who not just undock, but even with a green card, the way that immigration order is written, even with a green card, you're at risk.
I'd like to just add my voice and echo the sentiments of my distinguished colleagues. I think our legislature has been very busy. Even before Trump's election, we made a bold statement by spending more money for naturalization and also by guaranteeing health insurance for undocumented children in California. As we continue to build on that, we will continue to build on that. As you've heard, we have $45 million in our budget that was just approved this week to provide legal services so that families who feel threatened have a legal remedy to fight back. And so, you know, let's face it, when we experience fear of a law, we experience it in the places that are most personal, in our schools, as you heard from the senator, and home and in school. And there are two bills that I would just add to the list for you to track. AB 291 by Assemblymember David Chu provides housing protections that says a landlord cannot threaten to report a tenant to ICE. And AB 450, which was in the Labor Committee on the Chair on Labor, that says an employer cannot cooperate with ICE in the workplace. And so that we can have protections in home, in our school, and on our jobs, and then the legal protections in the community. We think there's a great movement brewing here in California.
So I failed to bring up one thing which I know is on a lot of folks who are here today's mind, and that is the jail expansions. Just in relationship to ICE, both the budget and a bill that I'm carrying has language that states that there will be no state money provided to a county who expands, if they have an existing contract with ICE, if they expand that contract and then they apply for money from the state to basically expand their jail, state funds would not be able to be used. Unfortunately, thank you. Unfortunately, it's not going to be able to affect the Richmond, the West County facility, because the West County is, the sheriff is not expanding their ICE contract. It looks like the what's called the Board of Community Corrections has already granted the West County facility that funding. So we may have to use other means to try to prevent that from going forward. But at least from this point on, any county that tries to expand their ICE facilities will not get state funding.
And I also want to add another angle to this, which is the importance right now, the growing and critical importance of our court system and attorneys. And I want to take the opportunity, a unique and rare opportunity, to say something positive about attorneys in a context that's not
Are you listening,
the butt of a
Alameda
joke.
Bar Association?
And I don't say that just because I am one. Okay, I do say that in part because I am one. But right now we have brave, courageous attorneys general, city attorneys, attorneys in organizations like the ACLU and others throughout the state who are taking our president to court over his executive orders. We have a president right now who believes that he's the CEO of a corporation called the United States of America, and he can do whatever he wants, including trampling all over our Constitution, our laws, our separation of powers, our checks and balances, and that's why it's so important now that we have our third branch, our court system, and attorneys who are taking these cases to court. The executive, the Muslim ban, the executive order that sought to defund sanctuary cities and states were both challenged in court and struck down by judges who are following the letter of the law. And so that's going to continue to be an important battlefield in this war to make sure that we're moving closer to justice and opportunity and equity and inclusion. So I want to just get that point in.
All right, excellent. Now, Senator Skinner, when you gave your opening remarks, you said, we've got these criminal justice reforms that have been passed, Prop 47, now Prop 57. You said we have a long way to go. Can you talk about some of the things that are happening right now, and what are some of the things you'd like to see happen? And again, of course, Assemblyman, please join in.
Thanks. California, we're kind of the birthplace of mass incarceration. And like I said, we have a lot of things we have to do to correct. We're the ones who started 3 strikes, and a lot of other states followed it. So while we've now made some adjustments to that, thanks to the voters, we also were one of the first states to put in various fixed sentencing on lots of drug charges. We just have, as a state, we have a very, very bad record of unfairly incarcerating people, and also having unfair sentences that do not appropriately fit the crime, and also having categories of activity that are considered crime that probably shouldn't have been. So we have a lot of things to fix. I have been the head of the Senate when I got elected, gave me 2 positions, 3, but 2 main ones. The chair of Public Safety Policy Committee and the chair of Public Safety Budget. Now, those 2 chairships were held by my predecessor, Senator Lonnie Hancock, who did incredible work in those 2 roles. And I have huge shoes to fill. Actually, my feet are bigger than hers, but that's all right. But I have she has done so much on it that I'm going to have to really work hard to fulfill the type of expectation that she has set. And let me just talk to you about a few things. One of the things that I'm doing right now, I have a resolution. Now, a resolution does not have force of law, but it's to initiate a very tricky discussion. And our intention by initiating the discussion is to very soon then, perhaps next session or the session after, change the law. And what it is on what's called the felony murder rule. Right now in California, we have a very large number of people who are serving life sentences, and some even life without parole, and very, very long sentences because they were charged under this felony murder rule where they did not even have to be at the place where the murder occurred. So in other words, they were not the shooter, they were not physically present at the murder. So let's say you're in the car and you and your goofball friends, you're driving and the goofball friends, break into a 7-Eleven, incidents occur, someone dies in that situation, and it doesn't even have to be the person you're robbing. So one of your goofball friends, say, dies. You can be charged under the felony murder rule. And we have people, meaning you, the driver, we have people now serving time, some of them life without parole, due to this felony murder rule. We have to change it because the sentence does not fit the crime. So I've introduced the resolution to begin to have the conversation, and there's some really, really good activist groups all through the state that are writing op-eds and doing a lot of work on it to help us understand what the implications of that bad charging is. Another one is breaking the school to prison pipeline. Yes. A lot of our school districts, many of them have stopped this practice. The practice I'm about to describe is what's called suspending or expelling a student for what's willful defiance. And willful defiance suspension can be for as simple as, I'm in a bad mood, I'm a teacher, I'm in a bad mood today, you've crossed me, I tell you to take off your hat, you won't take off your hat, I can suspend you for willful defiance. That means you're then out of school for maybe 3 days. Being out of school is basically putting failure on a student. So Oakland Unified, LA Unified, some of our better unified school districts have eliminated that, but statewide it's still used quite frequently, and the data shows it's used more frequently on kids of color, kids with disabilities, and LGBTQ kids. So, and those also are sometimes the category of kids most likely to not do well in school. So we need to create the ability for success for our students, and willful defiance does not do that. So I'm carrying a bill to get rid of that. Some other things for this criminal justice reform, I have a bill right now which I'm really honored that it's a 2/3 vote bill, and I got it off the Senate floor with 3 or 4 Republican votes. And that bill would, back in the 90s, voters of California passed a proposition, I don't remember the number, I think 26, but someone will have to correct me, which basically put a lot of juvenile felonies and made those juvenile felonies such that you could never have your record expunged. In other juvenile sentencing, once you've gotten through it and you've done whatever it is the courts have asked you to do, and you're crime-free for a certain period of time, you can totally have your record sealed. So that albatross is no longer being carried around your neck. But unfortunately, under this whole huge category of felonies, you can never have your record sealed. So what does not having your record sealed do to a young person? So a young person made a bad mistake, but then they're 25, 26, even 29. They've been crime-free. But because of that record, they are excluded from most employment, they're excluded from rental units, they're excluded from financial aid, they're excluded from educational opportunities. Basically, we've kept them in sentence for forever. So that bill, and I gotta remember my number, I never remember my numbers, sorry. SB 312, it's at the Assembly now, and we're gonna have to work hard to get the 2/3 vote there in the Assembly for it. And lastly, there's some budget actions, but I have a lot more to say on this, but I don't want to take more time because I want my colleagues to be able to weigh in. So go ahead.
Well, I would just say that I'm honored. I'm sitting here today with 2 great champions around criminal justice reform. You've heard Senator Skinner's work, and Assemblymember Bonta has really led on what is a groundbreaking and critical need around changing the cash bail system that disproportionately impacts low-income people and people of color, and I know he'll talk about that, but they've been incredible. We've got resources in this room. You know, many of us have heard this, that people start making decisions about the number of prison beds based on 3rd grade attendance and reading levels. And so we've got to do everything. We've got to do anti-recidivism programs to help people reenter. We've got to do prevention programs, and we've got to invest deeply. And we've got resources right here in the room. Alameda County, through their district attorney's office, has a renowned truancy prevention program that works with students and families where there's been chronic absenteeism. Our greatest chronic absenteeism are in the lowest grades, kindergarten through 3rd grade. And this puts families at risk for the student to drop out of school. If you drop out of school, you're more at risk to go into the criminal justice system. So, Teresa Drenick is here from that program. It's been modeled in other counties. I've had the opportunity to work with them to do truancy prevention. I'm very proud that a bill that used Prop $47 was passed. I introduced AB 1014, and that bill provides $35 million to school districts throughout our state to do things that keep kids in school. And it's now been allocated to over 30 school districts throughout our state. And I'm very proud of that it focuses on restorative justice and truancy prevention so that kids don't get pushed out of school because they didn't want to put their cell phone away or for some other issue. Because when they get pushed out, you can't learn, and we're pushing them into the criminal justice system. I mentioned AB 43, our tax on private prisons. Yeah, I was so disturbed after watching the documentary 13. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to take a look at it. The documentary chronicles how the prison system has become a modern-day form of slavery and how companies are literally profiting off of the incarceration of low-income kids and their parents and kids of color. The way it works is big companies basically invest in private prisons and in contracts, and they pay those who are incarcerated pennies per day to do work in the jail to help see these huge profits for these companies. I was so disturbed after seeing this practice taking place. I didn't know what to do. I started to do some digging, and I realized that in California, we are spending $5 billion on private prison and private companies that have prison-related contracts. They don't pay a single penny back to the state to do anything to prevent further incarceration. And so it's how we came to the idea that we'd put a 10% tax on all those private prison contractors to force them to give back to our state, to force it. Sorry, we're not asking for a voluntary contribution, right? You're taking money from the state and you're benefiting from someone else's, hardship, and to direct the money to the things that we know can prevent further incarceration. We've known forever that universal preschool is a way to ensure that kids graduate high school and are more likely to go to college and stay out of jail, but yet we've never funded it. Well, we got a 10% tax on that $5 billion. It's part of the way, and it's called AB 43, and I hope that you'll support that bill.
I'll just add 2 items. One, I introduced a bill this year to end California's use of for-profit private prisons. So similar to Assemblymember Thurman's, we know that for-profit private prisons have a fiduciary duty to maximize the profits of their shareholders, not to prepare Californians for successful reentry into society, and that's wrong and needs to end. And that's why I introduced the bill. I also introduced AB 42 this year, which seeks to fix a fundamentally broken, inhumane, and unjust money bail system. Thank you. Right now we have a system, a money bail system that punishes poor people for being poor and makes assessments about liberty and freedom based on the size of one's wallet instead of the size of one's risk. And you can have, under our current system, someone who's a danger to the community and is a flight risk, meaning they're not going to show up for the next hearing, but has enough money to bail out, who can get out and go free immediately after being booked into jail. Similarly, we have a system today where if you're not a risk to the public, you're not a flight risk, you will show up for your next hearing, but you don't have enough money in your pocket, you stay in jail. And you don't have your liberty, you don't have your freedom, and that's wrong, and we need to change that. And the human impacts are enormous for individuals who sit in jail who don't have to. They can lose their jobs because they're in jail and can't show up for work. They can lose their kids if they're a single parent with young kids and there's no one to take care of them. They can lose their car if it's parked in a time-limited area and they can't go get it. It'll get towed and taken from them. They could lose their homes or apartments if they can't pay their mortgage or rent. And so there's massive costs, social costs and human costs to this broken system. And there's a better way, and it's not the first time that a new system has been used that can do better. And we're trying to adopt that here in California that uses a risk assessment tool that does individualized risk assessments on a specific personal level to determine that person's risk, flight risk, risk to the public, and seeks to release folks safely with appropriate conditions in pretrial services, including things like electronic monitoring if necessary, or reminders to come back to their hearing, which is one of the biggest reasons that people don't show up for their hearing. People's lives are busy and complicated. And so there's a whole continuum of supports that would be part of our pretrial services program to create a better way and a better system. I think right now we have 64% of the people in our jails are there not convicted of anything pretrial. And many of them are there simply because they can't pay bail. And so we're paying a lot of money for those jail beds for folks who don't need to be in jail. So there's a better way, there's a more humane way, there's a way that will make the public safer, and that's why I introduced this bill. Thank you.
Just real quick on that subject, if you could just quickly answer the question, what is the status of the bail bond legislation and what can we do to help move it along?
The status is we have a two-bill strategy, a mirror bill in both the Senate and the Assembly. I introduced the Assembly bill, AB 42. My colleague, Senator Hertzberg, introduced SB 10. I believe both my colleagues are co-authors on the bills. Thank you for your support. We've been teaming up on this. And the Senate has been more progressive and supportive of thoughtful criminal justice reforms, and SB 10 has moved out of the Senate and is over in the Assembly now. AB 42, my bill, did not get enough votes to get out of the Assembly by the House of Origin deadline a couple weeks ago, and is a two-year bill, remains alive, but not moving out of our Assembly House this year. The Assembly floor is going to be the place where we need to make a difference, where we need people's help. We had 36 votes, so we needed 5 more. We have a lot of folks who stood up courageously in support of the bill, including my colleague Assemblymember Thurman that day, and Senator Skinner the day before in SB 10. But we need others to be supportive, and so we can follow up with a list of who some of those folks are, and it's always important for constituents to talk to their members and share their views of those bills. So if we can use contacts throughout the state to help provide support for the bill to those Assembly members who represent those districts, that would be extremely helpful.
Okay, so moving on, we've got so many great questions. We are going to start moving to audience questions, but before we do, actually, one member of the audience asked the question that I was also going to ask Assemblyman Thurmond, which was, given the fact that we have an education secretary, Betsy DeVos, and sort of the policies that she has supported with regard to encouraging vouchers and charter schools, for example, what is California doing to deal with that? This person wants to know specifically about special education. So if you could speak to that issue of her position and what we're doing.
Special education is completely underfunded, and the way we fund special education in this state and this country forces parents to get lawyered up to get the services that their students need instead of just providing them what they need. And so the parents that are in the know to go get an attorney do so, and those who do not are not able to get one. And so we have huge disproportionality around special education and students not receiving their services. Trump has made huge threats against education as we know it in California. And it's very important that everyone in this room reach out to those, to members of Congress to say, reject Secretary DeVos's proposals and all of her attacks. We know that our Bay Area Congress members are going to support this, but we need you to reach out to everyone and say, reject the mean-spirited approach to education coming out of Washington, D.C. It's sad that the people, the president keeps talking about choice, but what the president and Secretary DeVos are really saying is we want to take the money that we've used for public education and largely for low-income schools and give it away to private education and to fortify those who want a private education. They basically want to defund public education as we know it. Here's what they've started with as the things that they will cut: after-school programs, arts, Special Olympics, the free lunch program. Really? The free lunch program? because hungry kids can't learn. I know, I was on the free lunch program. My family was on food stamps. We got government cheese. We ate so much free government cheese, I thought that USDA was a brand name, right? These programs were there for students like myself who had to overcome financial obstacles, and they help our students to be successful every single day. And the President and Secretary DeVos are flat out attacking them. We're going to need to potentially create a rainy day fund just for education in California to push back if the President is successful in getting his mean-spirited education plan to get out of Congress. And we need you to help us make that happen, and call every congressperson and tell them to vote against all of these mean-spirited cuts. What we're doing in California to counter that is we've increased funding for a local control funding formula that gives our school districts local money to make decisions about programs to help students. We've expanding our funding for career technical education to help students get hands-on learning in different fields. We've expanded our funding for bilingual education so that we can create international students who are ready to be international leaders and activists and speak another language. And so we've expanded our funding there. We have expanded our funding for after-school programs in California so kids can have safe and structured activities during non-school hours that enrich their education. And we are expanding our work in the area of computer science because we want to make sure, I chair the Assembly's Committee on STEM education, we want to make sure that our students are prepared for the jobs of tomorrow. And so we're expanding our computer science roundtable so that every student can get access to computer science, so that our students of color, our young women, students from all backgrounds can be our engineers of the future. And for someone like myself who can barely figure out the on or off switch on my phone, right? I know that for our kids, it's intuitive. The language of coding is intuitive to them. I recently convinced Apple to come into juvenile hall in this county. They're going to teach a coding program to young men and women in juvenile hall as a kind of reentry and prevention program to help them realize that you can make a great living in coding and that it is an intuitive program. But our students shouldn't have to get incarcerated to get their first learning in coding or in computer science. And we've got to do more to make sure that they get that in all of our schools across California. I'm very proud that our colleagues in both houses have supported a budget that increases STEM, that increases bilingual education, and that increases our investment in our kids here in California.
So since Assemblymember Thurman mentioned that, we did just adopt the budget on Thursday, so June 15th, which is our constitutional obligation to do so on that day. And that budget, thanks to you, and I'm going to say thanks to you, because it's the voter approval of first Prop 30, and then in the last election cycle, what was the extension? 55. I always forget these numbers. Anyway, Prop 55, which was the continuation of Prop 30, and those were the taxes on our highest income earners in California that we continued. And as a result of that, and because the economy is still strong in California, we are now, the budget that we just adopted did put the first reinvestment in after-school programs. It had been flat. We had not increased funding to after-school programs since the recession. And it also brought our per pupil funding up to an average of a little higher than $11,000 per student. Now that is not as good as we hope to be at some point, but it's certainly far better than at any time during the recession, and at any time it's the best, even adjusted for inflation, it's the best per pupil funding in over 10 years. So that's very, very good.
A couple quick points on the subject of education. One, our charter schools need to serve all children as our traditional public schools do. And there was a recent study done by the ACLU and Public Advocates that showed that that wasn't happening in a very significant number of charter schools throughout the state, and that charter schools were using screens like applications and essays and testing, proof of citizenship, immigration status, required volunteer hours or a payment in lieu if you don't do the volunteer hours to keep certain students from coming to their schools, both in the admissions process and through the expulsion and removal process. And I have a bill this year that requires charter schools to serve all students, including special needs students, higher needs students, at the same levels as traditional public schools. And so that bill is moving with a lot of support, and we're very hopeful that we can get that bill signed this year. On the issue of funding, there's always, in my view, two parts of the discussion. One, the adequacy of the funding, and we know that our funding is not adequate for our public schools in California. Our per pupil school funding, while one of the highest, and that's important, that's something to be proud of, is not where it needs to be. So we need to continue to have a discussion about how we're going to provide adequate funding for all of our children in California. We have to talk about things like split roll, commercial property tax reform as a revenue source, an oil extraction tax, and other sources to make sure that all of our students have an opportunity to meet their full potential. We also, when we talk about funding, besides adequacy, you need to talk about distribution of the existing funding. And we did some important work a couple years ago with the local control funding formula to drive more resources to districts like Oakland that serve higher numbers of students who are in poverty or who are foster kids or English learners. And that was very important to provide more support and more resources for some of our more vulnerable children. We have to have universal preschool in California, period, end of story. The data is so clear about the 30 million word gap, how much the brain forms and grows in those early years before you even get to kindergarten. We have students all throughout California who are starting at a huge deficit by the time they're in kindergarten and have very difficulty ever overcoming that. And we can change that with a fully funded early childhood education system. Yeah. Thank you. And the other bookend of education, early education on the one hand, higher education on the other. We have tuition and fees that are way too high for kids in California to achieve their dreams. And a lot of us are fighting for tuition-free higher education, and I'm proud to be a co-author of a bill this year that would get us to tuition-free higher education with a millionaire's tax to cover the gap of $4 billion to make it tuition-free. Thank you.
And looking at the audience questions, there is a theme here. There are, it looks like, about a dozen questions related to healthcare. So we're going to move on and talk about a little something you might have heard of called SB 562. Now, yay. Now, to start off this conversation, I would love it if one of you guys would volunteer to explain how this is supposed to work. And I don't mean theoretically, I mean, how does SB 562 actually work? I'm not sure how many of us have had the time to really go through it with a highlighter. So if anyone would like to sort of give us a quick summary of what the bill would do. Anyone?
So SB 562 is California's, let me get its proper title. It was authored by my colleague, Senator Ricardo Lara, and it's the Healthy California Act. And what it does, or what it would do, is establish a single-payer system in California. And you could think of it like Medi-Cal for all. Medicare, yes, but it's because we administer it in our state as Medi-Cal. But anyway, now, the bill does not have an identified funding source yet. And the estimations on its cost are quite significant, as you can imagine. Now, much of the cost that's estimated is money that is already circulating in our economy. So we already have employers that are paying for employee health care. We have those of us who are buying on the exchange. We have other people that, in other words, you have while perhaps not the full cost estimate, because the bill, the way Ricardo Lara has written that bill, it includes a lot of great medical services, dental, vision, other things that many of us, even under the exchange or even with employer-covered health care, don't necessarily get. So, but the point is that much of the cost estimate is already money circulating in the economy. We would just have to push that money through different sources. So in other words, it would not be the employer any longer buying or negotiating a contract with a health insurer to provide then your health care. And it would not be the you and I buying on the exchange. It would be a governmental entity basically paying service providers, medical service providers, to provide all of us the health care we need. So like I said, the money's circulating, but how we get to the point where we create a revenue source, whether it's a payroll tax or whatever form, that then supplants the employer spent money or the deduction that you're out of your paycheck or that which you're paying into the exchange, and then combine it with the federal money for Medi-Cal. And that's an important thing when I bring that up, because that requires a federal waiver. So of course, for California to act in this way needs some cooperation from DC, which is probably questionable. Yes, good luck. So anyway, and right now the Senate passed the bill, it's in the Assembly's House, but it can't move forward until we identify the funding source. So it may not move forward this year because there needs to be more work done to do that proper identification of what the appropriate funding source is. But now I'll let my colleagues speak to it.
Also, if you guys could address, we've got 2 questions here. People would like to know what they can do to help this bill pass. So if you could talk a bit about what you need.
I'd like to thank my colleagues. We're all co-authors of SB 562, and thank the sponsor, many of whom are in the room, the California Nurses Association, for bringing this bill forward. Like many of you, we have been supporting single-payer bill, various versions for years, back to Sheila Kuehl, Mark Leno. There have been many, many versions. I know many of our constituents in other parts of our district, Oakland, Richmond, El Cerrito, Berkeley, have been calling for this. We've had some experience. We did a health care for all, and that was our version for undocumented children. We've been expanding it. California has done some great things in health care. The Affordable Care Act certainly is not perfect, but California has done some things that are worthy of recognition. And when the president started making threats to repeal the Affordable Care Act, I thought no better time like now to introduce a single-payer bill so that we articulate the highest form of our value is to say that we value people's health over the profits of some damn company. And we need to make sure that we never, ever allow someone to have their health suffer because they couldn't afford health care, because they couldn't get health care, to lose their life because they couldn't access health care resources. And while single payer is certainly complicated, it is the embodiment of that opportunity for us to do that. We cannot go back to what Trump would want, and that would be suffering for those who have what they call the pre-existing health condition, providing, hurting our families and our abilities to experience, health care for our families and for women. And we've got to continue to push back and to do the work to find a way to move the single-payer bill out of the Assembly. And what we need from you is to reach out to Assembly members who have expressed more moderate kind of concerns, who've been more business-focused, and tell them that you want them to focus on the people, that you want to make sure that they understand that healthcare is a right and not a privilege, and that everyone should have access to it. This is our moment for California to lead, to push back, and single payer has been successful in many other states. California is a place of innovation. We can come up with the blueprint for how to get it done, and there's no time like the present for us to pass a single payer healthcare bill. Look forward to your help on that effort. Thank you.
Would you like to name any of the people who these guys should be phone banking? Or no? Do you want to name any of the people who are? I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble. I just mean you should know who should be emailing. There you go. All righty. There's specific information. Okay. Councilman Mbatha. And also, if you could talk about the chances of it passing in the Assembly. I know the Assembly is a bit more overall, a bit more moderate than the Senate.
I believe, as I think most or all of you believe, that healthcare is a right, not a privilege, and it's for everybody, not just a few. And the single payer bill this year allows us to achieve that. It has a lot of difficult components, and I'll talk about those in a second. And California had been moving ever so much closer to that result through our rollout of the Affordable Care Act. We were the first in the nation to do so. We moved from 7 million uninsured Californians to 3 million with our Medi-Cal expansion and our implementation of the healthcare exchange. And we started making progress with one of the critical groups that were unfortunately excluded from the Affordable Care Act, and really was a big hole that you could drive a truck through in the Affordable Care Act, which is our undocumented community, by providing health care to undocumented California children on Medi-Cal. And so we were moving closer, and that was important. And now, of course, with the new federal administration, it's going to be hard to protect that progress. And so I believe that the time is now to move single payer forward. And one of the things that's really important to know is what is highlighting what Senator Skinner said, which is that there is no funding mechanism right now in the single payer proposal. Why is that important? When you have a tax to help fund a bill, it changes the voting threshold that you need. It's a simple majority now. It moved out of the Senate with a simple majority threshold, and now it's in the Assembly. I personally think it will be very difficult to get a 2/3 vote on single payer. That means every single Democrat, or maybe some Republicans, which to me is just not likely. I learned very quickly, like on day one, that not every Democrat is created the same up in Sacramento. And East Bay Democrats are special, and I appreciate my East Bay Democrat colleagues. And so I think, so the important thing to note that is if this bill in its current form, without the funding mechanism, moves forward, we'll have a critical win on policy, but we won't have the financing yet to implement it. So just want to condition expectations on that. And sometimes big lifts happen in 2 moves, not always 1, or sometimes 3, or sometimes you try and they don't make it in year 1, and you come back in year 2 and you get it done in year 2. This is a big lift. It's an important one and a critical one, and one that we all up here firmly believe in. But we got to continue to push and try to get it done this year. And we're having the discussions. Our House, everyone always knew that our House was going to be the more difficult House. So things are going according to plan. It got out of the Senate. It got the votes that it needed, and now we're going to have to drill down and try to get it out of the Assembly. So, you don't need to lobby Assemblymember Thurman or me on this. We're both co-authors. But we do need to make use of our statewide networks and other folks that are fighting for the people and trying to carry this huge lift together along with us to make sure that they talk to their legislators in the Assembly to get the bill passed.
Did you want to add something?
No, just on other aspects of healthcare, but maybe there's a question other questions around healthcare?
Oh boy, there are.
Okay.
We have plenty. So here's a question about single payer, and again, because we don't have the specifics, I'm still interested to know how is women's health and women's health choices protected under single payer care? This person writes, it seems easy to come under attack in a single payer environment. In other words, sort of if the government is running a program, it could also revoke coverage strategically in various places.
I totally appreciate that you could conceivably have a situation in California where the government is so different than it is now that it puts women's health care at risk, but that California has been extraordinarily strong, both the voters and the legislature, in protecting women's reproductive rights, extraordinarily strong. So given our history, I would I would feel confident, and of course, like anything, it requires all of us to always be vigilant that women's reproductive rights would be protected and continue to be well served, since every woman would have access to health care under a single-payer system. But because you raised the question of women's reproductive health care right now, we know that the funding for Planned Parenthood is at risk federally. They've not yet been able to whack the dollars out of Planned Parenthood, but in California, Planned Parenthood provides health care to a significant number of people. In addition to straightforward women's reproductive health care, they do much more than that. And so funding to Planned Parenthood being at risk would seriously impact healthcare access to many, many, many Californians. So you'll be happy to know that in the budget that we just adopted on Thursday, we designated $50 million for women's health services, which will, from the Prop 56 funding, which will go to Planned Parenthood.
Just a couple of other healthcare questions for either Assemblyman Thurmond or Bonta or Senator Skinner. This person writes, mental health care is hard to find. Insurance companies often don't pay for appropriate care. How can we fix this? Either in the current system or the proposed.
This is a very serious issue. 40% of people in our county jails or our state prisons are estimated to have mental health challenges or mental illness. Incarceration is not the place to deal with health issues. And while California, we have had the initiatives that our former pro tem, Darrell Steinberg, authored that brought more funding into our mental health space, it seems like we're still treading water. And there's a consortium of counties and mental health service providers and others who are really trying to grapple with this to bring recommendations to the legislature, because it's something that, like I said, we have been putting more funding to, say, for example, our K through 12 schools to provide better mental health services. We've been doing a lot of things, and yet the need is still so great. But one of the things that we just did, this was actually, you can thank Assembly Members Bonta and Thurmond, because when I wasn't in the legislature, they adopted a budget last year that had $67 million. It's not a lot, but it's something. $67 million that would go to counties so that counties could provide mental health programs for those who were arrested and might otherwise be put in a jail. So, but that money got hung up. The governor, when he released the budget this January, took that $67 million back. So meanwhile, we have folks sitting in county jails that shouldn't be there. So we just, in the budget we adopted on Thursday, grabbed that $67 million back. So we're going to have, starting at July 1st, $67 million available to counties so that they can set up mental health programs as an alternative to sending a person to county jail.
I have a question for you.
Well, I was going to add that our budget also provides funding for mental health services for students on our college campuses who experience high levels of stress and distress and trauma. Our budget that we just approved also increases funding for programs that deal with suicide. And this year I introduced a bill, every year I've introduced a bill to expand mental health funding. I don't know if it's because they put me in an office number that had the room 5150 when I first got to the legislature, but as a 20-year social worker working in mental health communities, I firmly believe we've got to remove the stigma around mental health. We've got to make it okay to receive services and support and treatment for our loved ones. And so this year, I've introduced a bill that would provide another $30 million for school-based mental health for our kids who experience trauma, who have challenges, who need support. And we're going to continue to fight to get that to the finish line until, as the senator has said, we've rebuilt our entire health safety network to provide adequate mental health services for everyone.
Excellent. Quick one.
Yep. The Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63 passed in 2004, was that the 1% income tax on individuals making over $1 million that Senator Skinner was talking about. Super, critical, dedicated source of funding for mental health. We need to make sure that we build on that and invest more. We need to make sure that we have an ongoing commitment to an enforcement of mental health parity for coverage in our healthcare coverage. And really important to me, as it is to Assemblymember Thurmond, is addressing childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences, which have such an impact on our young people. If you have multiple adverse childhood experiences, which are different incidents of abuse or neglect, they really have massive, very harmful health outcomes, chronic disease, lowers your life expectancy, and we can address those early in trusted environments like school-based health centers, as Assemblymember Thurmond was talking about. So that's a critical place to make a big difference early on in our California children's lives.
Okay, so we also have a number of questions about climate change and what California is doing in this area. And one of the things I wanted to ask, and any one of you three could weigh in on this, is what is the status of the cap and trade reauthorization? And I think I read that one version failed, but another version might be coming. I think you have a few years to deal with that. So, Assemblyman Thurmond, if you want to weigh in on that.
Yes, thanks. Unfortunately, there were two bills in the Assembly focused on cap and trade that at the end of our House of Origin deadline, neither bill was able to get the votes to get out of the Assembly. We have been in communication in both of our houses and with the governor to say that it is a commitment to get a bill that would extend cap and trade before the session is over, and we'll be working to get that done. We have an incredible tradition in this legislature of working on bills to address climate. And I know that each member will talk about some of the things that they've worked on. I'm very proud of a bill that we authored to address issues of methane. Last year, the governor signed a bill that we worked on that closes idle oil wells in the state of California. We had thousands of them that are leaking into our water supply. And I'm very proud that the governor signed the bill that I introduced that creates tougher enforcement for companies that violate and have environmental issues. And I represent a district that sends more kids to hospitals for issues related to asthma and from our air quality. And so it's very important to me, not just from a policy-making standpoint, but just from a human services standpoint and from an environmental justice standpoint, because we know that often those who are most impacted are kids of color and from low-income backgrounds, and that we need to be good stewards of the environment. I'm really proud to have been an author of the original SB 350 that said we need to move away from oil and support more renewables. And I'm very proud to have worked in a career to create a job training program that has solar panel installation as one of its main components, because I believe that green tech is good, and I want to change the narrative. The reason that the cap and trade bills didn't get off of the floor is politics, and there are people who say, well, yeah, the environment's important, but what about jobs? And I keep telling them, that's a false narrative. We don't have to choose between protecting our environment and our economy. They are not mutually exclusive, and we need to change the narrative and keep talking about our very robust green tech economy that allows people to earn a decent living and to have a job that won't kill them, and so that they can support their community and support our environment. And so stay tuned. We've been given instructions by leadership, by our governor, to work very closely to address getting a cap and trade bill package done by the end of this session. We'll also be looking at affordable housing, but the cap and trade bill is a top priority in our legislature. And it's not lost on me by the fact that the day that those two cap and trade bills died in the Assembly was the exact same day that President Trump announced that we were pulling out of the Paris Accords. And so we've got to, again, stay woke, right? And change the narrative and say that we can and we will do better by our environment, and that it is a false narrative to say that fighting for the environment is somehow bad for the economy. We know that's junk, and we need to push that back and continue our work. We will get cap and trade done this year.
We will. I'm confident we will. We just have too much at stake, and California all Californians are so incredibly proud that California is the nation's leader on this question. We are the nation's leader, and we are an inspiration to many other parts of the world. The type of leadership we've taken on renewable generation of electricity, on energy efficiency, now in moving towards getting off fossil fuels for our vehicles and what's called our low carbon fuel standard. All of those things are, the governor now, Governor Brown, he goes to Mexico, he goes to China. Folks from the Chinese government and from Chinese research institutions from Mexico are doing exchanges with our Energy Commission, with our ARB, meaning our Air Resources Board, our Utility Commission, and they want to learn from the leadership that California's taken. So while California, in terms of global emissions, is a drop in the bucket in a way, we are hugely influential by the actions that we take in terms of inspiring and also being able to replicate those actions in other parts of the world. So I think that, again, we're going to have to initiate our statewide networks so that all the Californians that feel as proud as we do around that leadership make sure that their elected representative knows that. Because in the bubble of Sacramento, what happens, we haven't spoken about this yet, but SB1. SB1 was a transportation measure that was passed in April, and all of us voted for it, and we'll be up front. That's going to be a gas tax. There's going to be an increase in gases. Yes, gas tax. And
This may be the only town hall in California where that gets an applause line.
right. It's not a huge gas tax. It's pretty nominal, and given the way gas prices, vary weekly, it's not going to be that noticed. But it is a gas tax, and it's also going to be an increase on the fee that we pay at the time a vehicle's registered. Now that is very toxic. You remember Gray Davis and how he got recalled and what Schwarzenegger did. Schwarzenegger called it the car tax and got up and smashed a car with a big sledgehammer and said he's going to get rid of car taxes. So a lot of legislators are legitimately nervous because of that vote. And one of my colleagues, Josh Newman, Senator Josh Newman, they are already circulating a recall petition. They've already turned 30,000 signatures in to recall him on what they're calling the car tax. So we have colleagues that are afraid that if they vote on the extension of cap and trade, that they will be once again attacked with another car or gas tax. So we need to do some good narrative, good framing about how it is California's very proud climate protection leadership, and need to help them feel like it's something that they want to do because it's not only the right thing to do, but they're proud about it, and that their constituents would be proud about it. So it'll take a little work, but we're going to get there. And I just want to say, I wanted to just mention a couple other things. I was very, very proud the other day to be at a kind of ceremony where, and I'm going to get into a little wonky details here, but every year the nations of the world, and unfortunately the United States will once again be a skunk in the room, but every year the nations of the world come together under something called the Conference of Parties. The UN Secretariat on Climate Change brings everybody together and they negotiate progress on how we globally are addressing climate change. The new head of that secretariat is the Prime Minister of Fiji, one of the island nations that is greatly, greatly threatened right now with sea level rise. The Prime Minister of Fiji was in Sacramento last week, and he gave our governor, Governor Brown, a special envoy. He's put him in a special position to that Conference of Parties, so that in November, when that meeting meets in Bonn, Germany, our governor will be able to participate along with other heads of states and provinces. And the reason that the Prime Minister of Fiji did this is to basically help communicate to the world that while we might have somebody in the White House who's reversing everything and trying to pretend that climate change isn't real. We've got the American public and our states and other who are clear that climate change is real and are acting.
On the original question of cap and trade, in Sacramento, sometimes we address things serially. So especially when they're the big items, because it's hard to get everyone focused who needs to be in the room, the governor, the pro tem, the speaker, talking about the issue at the same time. And so we've lifted up together, hoisted some big lifts, including investment, our transportation infrastructure investment. We got through our House of Origin deadline, got through our budget. We still need to do affordable housing. We haven't talked about that yet, and that's something that we are going to have a critical conversation about. But right now, of course, and right now, the focus is the energy is really moving into cap and trade. And there was a bill in the Senate authored by the pro tem and Senator Wieckowski, and 2 bills in the Assembly, as had been referenced, and those all needed to come together at some point. And the governor has made it clear that this is a top priority now to do those negotiations, get a deal done, and cut the deal and get something passed. So don't worry that it hasn't happened yet. There's still time, and the negotiations are there's enthusiastic negotiations happening now.
But good to mobilize the networks.
Yes, no, don't sit back either. Stay involved and keep pushing and get those statewide networks activated. And last year we doubled down in California on our commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and being a global leader on addressing global climate change with AB 197 and SB 32, building on AB 32. We pride ourselves in being a global leader on the issue of addressing global climate change and being a model for the rest of the world. And we're going to stay there because it's more important now than ever, as my colleagues have stated. We've divested our biggest pension plans, CalSTRS and CalPERS, from investing in thermal coal projects. We prevented the use of public funds for any bulk coal terminals going forward. So every year we make great progress and create models for other states and other nations to use, and we're going to continue in that role because it's ever so critical today.
Okay, all righty, thank you. So we have just a little while left, and we have a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to ask you guys to give some quick answers, and I'm sorry because these are very important issues. I don't mean to give them short shrift, but we just are trying to get you guys as much information as possible between now and the end here. So one question that I presume could be answered somewhat quickly is this one. It says the federal government has shut down the earthquake detection program as it was about to be initiated. Does the state plan to step in and move forward with this program? Are you guys aware of movements to fill that in?
Yes, and to be honest, I don't know if the money to continue it in California was put in this budget. I know that it was, it's been a priority of a number of us, and our Secretary of State, Padilla, he has been a big champion of this monitoring and warning system. So if we didn't get it in the budget this year, I will work hard to make sure it gets in the budget next year. I just don't know if it was in the budget this year.
It's a big budget. And I also have 2 questions here related to, and I'm sort of just going to shift gears a bit here to a question about reentry into jobs and life after serving jail time or prison time. I've got, will there be funding for reentry housing to help ex-offenders, and where are the jobs for the previously incarcerated? So if you guys could talk a little bit about what you're doing for formerly incarcerated people.
Thank you. I really appreciate that we got that question because I wanted to talk a little bit about, in my initial discussions around our putting justice back in the criminal justice system, one of the challenges is as we fix things like with Prop 47 and 57, where more people are being able to get home earlier than they had expected, we have to provide the support on the other end. We have to provide the community-based support. If you were spending a good amount of your years in a facility that didn't provide you education, didn't provide you drug treatment, or didn't deal with some of the underlying causes that might have led you there, it's much harder when you go home. And the reality is, as I think all of us know, the vast majority of people in prison are coming back home. And so we have an obligation to do our best to provide the proper services. And clearly, the cost of housing is very, very prohibitive for people who are coming back from being incarcerated. So this budget, it's not a lot, but it's something. There's $25 million that was approved just on Thursday for parolee housing with wraparound services. And it's going to be a grant program, so a facility here in Oakland or a facility in Richmond could apply, and I'm hoping they will, because so far we don't have that type of wraparound services parolee housing. I mean, we have some, but not a lot, and we could be eligible for that funding, so I hope that we take advantage of it, that there is a group or the county will work together and go after that money. The other thing on job training, I see Planting Justice here, Sky from Planting Justice, and I pointed out because it's very important. People might think, well, you know, why should we have arts programs or gardening programs or things like that in our state penitentiaries? Because they are very important for just that bringing the soul back, and also real legitimate job training. And Planting Justice is a business that got created as a result of the gardening program in San Quentin. And it now is right here in our community. And they operate a nursery, 2 nurseries. They operate landscape services. They're doing incredible things. And all the people working for them are formerly incarcerated people. So any of you that need landscaping services, talk to Planting Justice. But those are the kinds of things we need to do more of. There's some money in this budget we approved on Thursday for our workforce investment boards, our county-based workforce investment boards, to provide parolee workforce training. There's also, UC Berkeley has an underground scholars program. And we don't have a similar program in our community college system. There might be 1 or 2 of our community colleges that have some very special services for the formerly incarcerated, but it's not widespread. So I managed to get some money in this budget to go to the community college chancellor's office to begin to develop community college-based specific programs for our formerly incarcerated.
Either one you want to?
I also just want to highlight our community reentry programs, which we started piloting these a couple years ago, and we're investing more into them. This is when, towards the end of an individual sentence in California, they move out of the locked facility that they're in and into a community-based program that has housing and job training and drug rehabilitation programming, anger management programming, a whole suite of services that create an opportunity to be successful upon reentry, as opposed to a very abrupt release from prison with a few dollars in a bus ticket. And the Californians get matched with jobs and create a job history. They might continue in that job after they finish completion, or they complete their sentence, or at least they'll have a recent work history that they can put on a resume to find a job elsewhere. And there's growing interest and support for this. Started with a couple pilots throughout the state. A new one was created in San Francisco, and I'm working on and hoping to be successful in bringing one to the East Bay as well.
Great. So, alrighty, so we just have a few minutes left, but I feel bad because this is we could do an entire session on this one topic of housing. And so with, if I could just ask the members here to be brief as possible here, because we don't want to cut into your closing statements. But one person asked, do you guys support Scott Wiener's by right development bill? I think that's SB 35. If so, why or why not? That's a bill that sort of says that in communities where there isn't enough housing, or that they're not building the housing that comports with benchmarks that they've set for themselves, that there becomes a sort of ability to build without necessarily being subject to all the CEQA requirements. This is supposed to sort of shine a light on places that are underdeveloped and sort of make it easier to more quickly build in those places. So that's SB 35. So you can talk about that, and also just housing in general, what you're doing to help with what I think we can all agree is a problem for just about everybody.
I think we need to operate on two tracks. One, do everything that we can to increase supply of affordable housing throughout the state, but also protect our tenants where they currently live. And I've proposed a bill to repeal Costa-Hawkins, which will allow locals to provide more protections for tenants throughout the state and help keep roofs over their heads. We also need to have a dedicated source of funding in California for affordable housing. We lost our redevelopment agencies, which had a dedicated source. We have some proposals now, including a recording fee that's coming out of the Senate that would generate revenue for a dedicated source. Also closing the second mortgage interest deduction on vacation homes and redirecting that money towards affordable housing. On Scott Wiener's bill, his amended by right, I think it's so important that everyone do their fair share and do their fair part in the region and around the state to create affordable housing. He's taken some really important amendments to address the issues of all the stakeholders, and I am supportive of it.
I've already voted for SB 35, both in the Housing Committee, and which I serve on in the Senate, and also on the floor. And Senator Wiener has been, just as Assemblymember Bonta indicated, he has been incredibly dedicated, working with all stakeholders on that bill and making a variety of revisions to craft something that's pretty narrow, but in very unique circumstances would let us get some housing to move forward fast without obstacle. And I've been very impressed with his work.
I haven't seen Senator Wiener's bill yet. I don't want to impugn it. He's a very innovative, smart senator and very committed, and I believe deeply committed to affordable housing, and I'll take a very good look at it. Last year, the governor asked us to agree to a by right framework that I thought made the wrong assumption. It made the assumption that if you give developers more of what they want, you'll get more housing built. I think that's the wrong question. We've had lack of supply. Our housing supply has not kept pace with our population because we simply haven't had the funding to build the affordable housing. We've only had market-driven housing, and the developers will tell you to your face that building low-income housing and housing for seniors doesn't pencil out. Some years ago, in this very community, a block from where we sit, I ran a nonprofit that built housing for some of our most vulnerable young adults, young people transitioning out of foster care. Helene here worked with me, and we built housing programs for those who get pushed out at age 18 because they had nowhere to go, and they became homeless. We've got to have supply. When we lost redevelopment, we lost a critical funding resource to build affordable housing for those who are vulnerable and for those who work in our community. And so that's why I'm supporting a couple of bills. One, a permanent funding source that would, through the Senate, there's a bill in the Senate that creates a permanent funding source by putting a small transaction fee if someone does a refinance. It's like $75. It creates a permanent funding source, $300 to $500 million every year that can be used for affordable housing, that can leverage more money to build housing for low-income families, for those who are homeless. The other bill that I have introduced is a teacher housing bill, recognizing that we have a challenge in recruiting teachers and we have a teacher shortage. We had a teacher this year who was reported who was homeless and keeping it from her students because she was worried about how they would react to it. Our workforce is traveling 2 hours sometimes in each direction to get to their jobs because they can't afford to live in the communities where they work. I think we have to make a major investment in supply. I think we got to put our money where our mouth is and build a permanent funding source. And I think teacher housing, it's AB 45, by the way, is a big part of the solution around affordability and closing our achievement gap by making sure our teachers can afford to live where they work.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move into closing statements here, and we can start with Assemblyman Thurmond. But as you guys give your closing statements, I'd like you to try and incorporate the answer to this question. Somebody here in the audience wrote a question I'd never seen before. This person asked, what do you do to unwind and self-care during tough fights of leading the resistance? So if you could build in your bubble bath and reality TV. I don't know. Build that in. Maybe add a little bit about that in your closing statement here to the group. And by the way, audience, if I didn't get to your question, the reason we asked for your information is so that the folks here can get back to you on your specific question. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to you, but they will have answers for you. Okay, so Assemblyman Thurmond.
I admit I'm completely stumped on how to answer this, and I want to hear all of the suggestions. It's been an honor for me to serve in government. This is my 10th year, and I served at the City Council and the school board when there were tough decisions. I've loved serving in the Assembly. I've made the decision that I want to make my political legacy helping kids, and I'm on the ballot to be superintendent of public instruction in the state. And so I don't know when I get time to do the self-care, but someone said something to me once that has stayed with me. And they said, do things in a way that would make your grandparents proud. And I changed it to be, do things I want to serve in a way that would make my kids proud. After Mr. Trump got elected, I thought we should never, ever, ever leave the state of California, right? It's a special place. It is such a special place. And sometimes it's the only place I feel safe, given what's happening in our country. But it's special because it's been a place of innovation. And because of what Trump is doing, we have to be the face of the resistance here in California. We have to push back. And I hope that people here will reach out to organizations like those that are here today, like Organizing for Action in California, to get to Congress members who are likely to vote for what Trump wants and say to them, we're watching and we want you to vote against it. It's very important that we deliver those messages, that we push back on the Trump agenda that seeks to defund education, to erode health care, and to really set us back in what we're trying to do for environmental justice. And so I hope that you will reach out to these members, and I hope that you will support members like my colleagues who stand up and fight for the right thing all of the time. And a lot of times, progressive members get taken for granted, and you've got great progressive champions who I'm glad to have shared the stage with here today, and I hope that you will support them, and I hope that you'll check out the things that we're doing to try and improve our schools, our housing, and our environment on my website at tonythurmond.com. I feel very full from the conversation today, and I feel even more committed to being part of the resistance, and I want to thank you for what you've provided here today. Let's keep up the great work, stay woke, and we won't give up, and together we'll stand up and stand out for California. Thank you so much for today.
For me, knowing that I represent the most progressive and the most activist-oriented constituents in the entire state of California it empowers me every day. And it makes me feel good. It makes me feel optimistic when I get up in the morning, even though that election night last November I never had such contradictory feelings of joy, obviously, I got elected, and just despair. But knowing that I represent this Senate District 9, which is made up of both of my colleagues here as constituents, that mine is both, and you are the folks that want us to push the edge of the envelope and to be bold. And so while we don't always have colleagues who are there right at the point that we introduce something, we all have that stick-to-itness that we just keep at it. And you push us to keep at it, and we do. We just keep at it, and if it means, as my colleague, Assemblymember Bonta pointed out, sometimes it doesn't happen the first time you introduce it, but we just keep reintroducing and working with the networks and working with the activists and working with our colleagues to get to the point where they agree and we can push the envelope in the way that you all expect. And that's a lot of what keeps me feeling good and feeling energized and keeping my health up. And the honor of serving with representatives, with colleagues like Assemblymember Bonta and Thurmond. All of our colleagues are not like this, but we're clever, so we keep trying. But other than that, I like to garden. I'm a food gardener, so I got my blueberries and my raspberries and a bunch of things like that, and an asparagus bed, and I pretty much am goofing around in that garden any day that I'm home. And then I like to watch goofy shows like Empire, which I call the Cookie Show, you know. I like cookie, personally, and a few other things like that.
Thank you.
I was hoping I was going to hear about bubble baths and foot massages and exciting things, but the gardening and the Empire is awesome too. You know, for me, it's always most relaxing. The happiest place for me is when I'm with my 3 kids and my wife Mia. And you know, we're pulled to Sacramento many days a week. We're traveling around the state, sometimes the nation, looking at best practices and trying to identify the best policies to support our constituents in our state. But those moments that are unfortunately fewer and far between, when you can be with your kids and be with my wife and just be a husband and a dad are the times that really energize me and remind me of what's important, and you know, and making sure that we are creating a better future for all of our children. And I like to run, and I realized there's a thing now called cardio meetings. Someone invited me to one. I didn't know what it was, but I guess we were supposed to sit on stationary bikes together and ride together. But I just did it. One of my first meetings on a long run around Lake Merritt. So I'm booking cardio meetings if anybody wants to have one with me in the near future. You know, right now I just believe what we all want in our work is to be doing something meaningful, to be doing something important. And to me, it's just incredibly invigorating and inspiring to have a job, you know, where you have an honor and privilege of doing your best every day to make people's lives better. And you know, waking up knowing that there's something to do today that will get that done, that will make people's lives better, that will increase someone's health care, quality of their health care, or get them closer to meeting their dreams, or meeting their full potential is really invigorating for me. So it's a special, privileged place that I'm very honored to be able to sit in one of the assembly seats in this great state, and that, you know, makes me proud and happy and invigorated and inspired to continue to work on behalf of all of you. You know, I just want to end in a place where I started. I talked about how we've had dark chapters in our history in the past, and we're living through one now. But we're going to do what we've always done. We're going to stay focused, stay committed, stay resilient, keep fighting, guided by the right principles and values, and we're going to emerge stronger and better. And we're going to do that because of all of you, because of all of our organizational partners here who are fighting on the ground every day for justice and opportunity and equity and inclusion, and all of you who came out today because you care and you want to fight for a better California, and you want to work in concert with other like-minded folks to get things done for the people that we care about. So, you know, we're a team, and we're going to fight shoulder to shoulder with all of you to make our state better, to stand up for California's values. I think California, at this moment in time, this dark time nationally, is a bright light and a beacon of hope, and it's because of our teamwork working together. So thank you for being here.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the community groups who came to chat with you and to connect with you guys. And of course, thank you to the members here on stage for your candor and your time. And there's still some sunshine out there. So I hope you guys get out there and enjoy some of the day. Thanks again for being here.